They spent 10 years funding my sister's dream coaches tournaments, even PR training. Me, I trained in silence with $40 shoes from eBay. But on the day I stepped onto the world podium, the cameras caught their faces, and everything changed. This isn't just a story about winning, it's about being underestimated, forgotten, and still choosing to rise. Stay with me because what happened next, no one saw coming. The gold medal weighed heavier than I expected. Not physically, though, it was no feather, but emotionally, like the full gravity of every mile. Every rejection, every silence had been melted down and forged into this disk of metal now resting on my chest. I stood still, not stiff, not proud, just still, like I was afraid any movement would break the fragile membrane between this moment and everything it had taken to get here. Above me, the American flag rose slowly into the arena lights, and the national anthem swelled across the stadium, carried by 1,000 unseen speakers. The crowd was roaring, but it all felt muted, like I was underwater. I could see their hands clapping their mouths, cheering, but I heard only the pounding in my ears and the echo of my own breath, sharp and shallow. Then the screen shifted. On the jumbotron above the track, the live feed split into 2 panels, me on the left, eyes forward, posture steady. On the right, my parents. I saw them freeze. No clapping, no tears, not even an attempt to smile for the camera. My mother had her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her face blank as stone. My father looked like he'd just swallowed something bitter. His jaw clenched, his eyes refusing to meet the camera's lens or each other's. It was the first time I'd seen them in over a year, and the first time they saw me as something undeniable. A moment later, the stadium announcer's voice cut through the anthem, clear and formal, like a verdict being delivered. Ladies and gentlemen, your 5,000-meter world champion, Julia Hart. Independent athlete, self-coached, no private funding, no institutional sponsorship. Training unaffiliated, and now record holder. The words dropped like weights. People cheered louder, flags waved. A woman in the second row stood and screamed my name. But I couldn't take my eyes off the screen. Off them. That was the sentence I'd waited my entire life to hear, not because I needed to prove something to them anymore, but because the world deserved to know the truth. They had invested everything in Sophie, my sister, their golden child. $60,000 over a decade, tennis academies, personal coaches, nutritionists, travel teams, private tournaments, sports, psychologists. Even a publicist when she hit the regional circuit. Me, I got advice like, don't push yourself too hard, it's just running. And later, you can train on your own. That's the beauty of your sport, right? My first pair of real racing shoes cost $60. I bought them used, worn in, but not yet worn out. Paid for with coffee shop tips folded into a paper envelope I kept hidden in my sock drawer for 3 months. The laces frayed. The grip wore down in 3 weeks. I still ran 150 miles in them. No one asked me if I needed better gear. No one offered to drive me to training or pick me up after dark. No one ever came to my meets. But that wasn't what stung the most. What hurt was how normal that became. How quietly they made me invisible, like I was someone else's kid. And now here they were, forced to watch their less promising daughter take a victory they never imagined she'd reach, let alone own completely. It wasn't revenge. I didn't want to humiliate them. I just wanted them to see, to look at me, and finally silently acknowledge what they had missed. Not just what I became, but who I always was. From the corner of my eye, I noticed Sophie in the row behind them. She was standing, clapping. Her face was streaked with tears, and for a second our eyes met. She mouthed, "You did it." I nodded slow. I didn't blame her. She didn't ask to be favored. She didn't ask to be chosen. It wasn't her fault that she got everything I didn't. It only mattered now what she chose to see, and she was finally seeing me. The anthem ended. A flood of camera shutters clicked into a rhythm that felt like applause. Flashbulbs popped. I stepped down from the podium with deliberate control, as if each movement had been choreographed for this moment. I passed a corridor of reporters. I didn't stop. One shouted, "Julia, what would you say to young athletes watching you right now?" I didn't even turn my head, but I whispered to myself, just loud enough to hear, "Run when no one cheers. Train when no one watches. Win so loudly they can't forget you again." And I meant it. Because standing here, medal around my neck, applause behind me, parents silent on a screen, they couldn't undo what they'd ignored. But I could rewrite what came after. I didn't need their apology. I didn't need them to clap. They had written me off as the backup story. Today I rewrote the headline. Sophie started tennis lessons when she was 5. At the time I was 7 and thought it meant nothing more than fancy white skirts and rackets that were too big for her hands. But by the time she was 8, she had a private coach, a travel schedule, and an embroidered duffel bag with her name on it. Our parents enrolled her in the Hartwell Tennis Academy, $10,000 a year, and worth every penny, as Dad always said. At home there were charts taped to the fridge, Sophie's nutrition goals, Sophie's weekly match schedules, Sophie's stretching routines. Meanwhile, my name Julia showed up once a month when I emptied the trash. I didn't resent her. Not really. She loved the sport, and she worked hard. She was good. But I couldn't help but notice the gravitational pull she had on everyone in the house. Conversations orbited around her forehand technique, her backspin, her chances of being scouted by scouts I'd never heard of. No one ever asked what I liked to do. So I didn't tell them. I kept it to myself, like a secret I didn't trust the world to hold properly. What I loved was running. Not in a formal way. Not then. I ran around the block before dinner. I ran through the woods behind school. I ran laps on the old track when no one was looking. It wasn't organized or efficient. It just made me feel alive, free. Like the world made more sense when I was in motion. The first time my mom saw me timing myself with a dollar store stopwatch, she sighed like I'd spilled milk on the carpet. "That's not a real sport, honey," she said without even turning from her tablet. "You're not chasing anything. It's just running in circles. It's a waste of time." I didn't argue. I just ran a little harder that evening. Over the next few years, the divide grew wider. Sophie's gear got fancier custom rackets from Spain, personalized shoes from Nike's Junior Elite program, monogrammed towels. Her coach was French thin, sharp-eyed, and expensive. He visited twice a month and reviewed her matches via video when he was abroad. He once watched me sprinting around the neighborhood and said, "That one runs like she has a ghost chasing her." No one laughed. No one replied. I became a shadow. Present but not accounted for. Every Christmas deepened the gap. I remember one year Sophie unwrapped a brand new Apple Watch with GPS tracking and personalized match alerts. Our parents smiled like they were unveiling the key to her future. I opened a gift bag and pulled out a clearance bin headband and a sweat towel, still with the sale tag attached. "It's practical," Dad said with a nod. "You're always running around." Running around. Not training, not improving, just running around like I was chasing butterflies, not building endurance in my legs or learning how to control breath when lungs started to burn. It was always like that. For every tournament Sophie traveled to, I stayed behind to finish schoolwork or help tidy up. When she came back with silver medals, the kitchen filled with balloons and congratulatory posters. When I won my first 5K community race, Mom looked up from chopping onions and said, "That's nice. Don't overdo it, though. Your knees will thank you when you're older." No posters, no balloons, not even a fridge magnet. The worst part, I started believing they were right. I internalized their silence like scripture. I learned not to ask for new shoes, not to mention local races, not to speak when Sophie was in a tournament mood. I learned to clap for her from the stands and then walk home while the rest of the family piled into the car for a post-match dinner. 2 daughters, 2 athletes. But only one was an investment, the other was independent. The word sounded empowering when teachers used it, when guidance counselors said Julia's so self-motivated. When I earned good grades, people smiled and said, she doesn't need hand-holding. But at home, independent meant invisible. At home, it meant unfunded. Still, I ran. Not for approval, not even for proof. Just to remind myself that I could. That even if I couldn't afford coaching or gear or fanfare, I could move forward. My legs didn't care if anyone was watching. And maybe that's where I first realized I didn't have to wait for permission to become something more. I didn't expect the letter. Honestly, I had already thrown mine away thinking it was a generic rejection or maybe a catalog from a sports brand I couldn't afford. It wasn't until I saw the envelope in Sophie's hands, her face lit up like a sunrise, that I went back and checked my pile of unopened mail. Same letterhead, same seal, same call to represent our region at the National Youth Trials. Her for tennis, me for long-distance track. 2 invitations, 2 daughters, 1 living room, and as it turned out, only 1 budget. My parents gathered us the next evening around the dinner table, not for a celebration, but for what they called a planning discussion. The tone was already wrong. They had the spreadsheet open before I'd even sat down. Dad cleared his throat like he was delivering bad news to a boardroom, not his children. So he said, tapping his pen against the edge of the printed budget, after reviewing our finances and the projected expenses for both tracks, we've come to a decision. Mom glanced over at me, her expression unreadable, then looked back at Sophie with something like anticipation. We've decided to fully support Sophie's training path, Dad continued. It's a high-visibility sport, and frankly, tennis has more long-term potential. Sponsors, college scouts, media exposure. It's a better return on investment. I felt something in me deflate, like air leaking from a balloon I'd been trying to keep upright for years. What about my training, I asked, trying to sound calm. The tryouts for distance running are the same weekend. I was invited too. Mom gave me a sympathetic sort of smile, the kind people give when they're about to tell you why you don't matter as much as someone else. Sweetheart, she said gently, you're incredibly self-driven. You don't need the same kind of structure as Sophie. And running just doesn't get the same kind of attention. It's admirable, but it's not commercial. There it was. Not commercial, not marketable, not valuable. You're strong, she added. You'll figure something out. Maybe there's a local club team you can join or some community events to stay active. That might be more appropriate. More appropriate? I sat there staring at the budget sheet. Line after line dedicated to Sophie equipment stipend, nutrition plan, bi-weekly coaching, mental performance consultant, travel and accommodation estimates. Next to my name, blank space. Literally blank. Not even a line item. It was like I didn't exist in their vision of the future. After a few seconds, I broke the silence. Can I at least have Sophie's old Garmin? I asked, nodding toward the fitness watch she'd outgrown last season. It still works, right? Just has a scratch. Mom blinked, then laughed softly like I was being sweet or naive. Oh, honey, it's completely scuffed. I was planning to toss it. You don't want that, besides you're better off tracking manually. It builds discipline. I stared at her. It builds resentment, I wanted to say. But I didn't. I just nodded, folded the empty part of the budget sheet over, and stood up from the table. Thanks for the meeting, I said flatly. Then I went for a run. It wasn't a revenge run. It wasn't dramatic. I didn't sprint down the street with tears in my eyes and thunder in my chest. I just ran. The same way I always did. Quiet, steady, one foot in front of the other. Because some of us don't get handed a spotlight. Some of us become it. My alarm went off at 4:45 a.m. Not the gentle kind of alarm either. The kind that buzzes like a hornet inside your skull and makes your bones flinch. I never hit snooze. I couldn't afford to. By 5:05, I was outside. Hoodie pulled over my ears, breath forming tiny clouds in the cold. I stretched against the light post by our street corner. My shoes were 2 seasons old, $40 second-hand scuffed on the sides, the soles uneven. I bought them off eBay from a seller in Colorado who ran trail races and listed his gear as gently used. The only thing gentle about them was the lie. But they worked. Or rather, I made them work. 5 days a week, I ran before the world woke up. 6th day, I cross-trained with YouTube videos and a dumbbell set I picked up from a yard sale. Sunday, I rested, which meant I stretched in silence and did laundry at the cheapest coin machine in town. That was my training plan, designed by trial, error, and a will that refused to give out. Meanwhile, Sophie's morning started with a ride. A sleek black SUV pulled up to our driveway at 7:30 sharp. Her coach greeted her like royalty. She had a meal prep box tucked into her gym bag, pre-labeled with her macros. Sometimes she wore a jacket with her name printed in white block letters across the back, courtesy of her sponsor. I once asked if I could borrow it on a cold day. She laughed. Not meanly, just like the idea was ridiculous. "It's a prototype," she said. "And it's branded. They'd notice." I didn't ask again. After my run, I headed to the cafe. The shift started at 6:30. I washed dishes, wiped counters, restocked muffins, memorized regular orders, and smiled until my cheeks felt numb. I saved every tip. Protein powder was expensive, but I found a brand online that came in busted packaging, heavily discounted. They called it ugly stock. I called it fuel. Lunchtime meant a peanut butter sandwich, an old banana, and one YouTube video on pacing or posture, or how to fix heel striking in runners with no coach. I watched the same videos so many times I could recite them, not because they were perfect, but because they were all I had. Sometimes I trained at the old gym on 8th Street. It was a converted warehouse with bad lighting and worse ventilation. The floor mats curled at the corners. The treadmill wheezed louder than I did. But they didn't charge much. And the front desk guy let me use the foam rollers for free. One afternoon, I was cooling down by the water fountain when I saw it. On the outside of the building, right there on the other side of the smudged window, was a giant poster. Sophie, mid-swing, glowing, confident, dressed in crisp white, the words above her future of women's tennis. It took me a minute to realize it wasn't just a poster. It was an ad for the very athletic apparel brand I once applied to for a product trial. They never responded. She never told me they picked her. I stood behind the glass for a long time. The contrast was almost poetic. Inside, sweat rust effort. Outside, spotlight polish projection. She looked like a future. I looked like a disclaimer. But the thing about training in obscurity is that you start to make peace with it. You stop waiting for someone to notice. You stop craving the applause. You just work. And sometimes that silence becomes your edge. I trained alone. I read articles meant for coaches. I wrote my own drills in a spiral notebook I kept in my gym bag. I timed my splits with a second-hand kitchen timer. No cheering section, no feedback loops, just the sound of breath and will. When I got home late at night, Sophie was often already asleep, her gear bag neatly zipped by the door, her schedule laminated and stuck to the fridge. Mine was scribbled on the back of a cafe receipt and shoved in my sock drawer. But I didn't complain, because while she was building a career that fit inside the spotlight, I was building one that wouldn't need it. I met Tessa on a Tuesday morning when I was running hill sprints behind the industrial park. There weren't many places to train without stares or questions, but that stretch of cracked asphalt between the back of an auto shop and a chain-link fence gave me anonymity and elevation. It was ugly, uneven, and perfect. She was already there when I arrived, sitting on the hood of a battered red Jeep, sipping black coffee from a thermos and watching me like someone who knew exactly what she was looking at. I kept my head down and did my set. 5 reps, 6, 7. On the 8th, my left calf started to cramp. I stumbled at the crest, wincing and cursed under my breath. That's when she stood up and called out, "You're leaning too far forward on the drive phase. Shortens your stride." I froze. Not because of what she said, but how she said it. Not like a stranger, not like someone guessing, like someone who'd been there. She walked over, her build lean and tough, her expression direct. Early 30s, maybe? Skin weathered from time and sun. Her hair was pulled back in a no-nonsense bun, and she wore shoes that had clearly outrun most excuses. "You're running with anger," she said plainly. "That'll get you fast, but not far." I blinked, caught off guard. "Do I know you?" I asked. "Used to," she shrugged. "Name's Tessa, ran college track, was headed to nationals. Then they said I didn't fit the look for brand deals. Translation, not marketable. So the funding stopped?" She didn't sound bitter, just factual, like weather. That was how it began. We didn't formalize anything. She never said, "I'll be your coach," and I never asked for her resume. But she started showing up. 3 times a week at first, then more. She never charged me a cent. We trained behind warehouses under bridges on trails so obscure Google Maps gave up. No fancy equipment, just chalk lines on pavement, cones borrowed from a friend, a handheld stopwatch, and an old clipboard with drills she'd written by hand. "Track is everywhere," she told me once. "People think you need a stadium. You don't. You need legs, lungs, and someone who'll call your bullshit." Tessa was that someone. She didn't care about pace charts or PRs. She cared about form, about discipline, about whether I was pushing for precision or just pushing through pain. She could spot a dropped shoulder from across a parking lot, could mimic my gait with eerie accuracy, then show me exactly how to fix it. "You overstride when you're unsure," she said one morning as we reviewed video from her phone. "Like you're asking the ground for permission instead of telling it where you're going." We rarely talked about my family. She never asked why I didn't have a coach. I never told her about Sophie or the meeting at the dinner table or the secondhand shoes. It wasn't necessary. She knew. There was a kind of shorthand between women who'd been underestimated. One day after a particularly grueling tempo run, I collapsed onto the grass, sweat pooling at my collarbones, chest heaving. She handed me a bottle of water and sat beside me. For a long moment, we didn't speak. Then she said, "You don't need funding. You need truth. And the truth is you're good enough, but you have to stop waiting for someone else to say it first." I looked at her. She wasn't smiling. She didn't need to. Her words didn't ask for agreement. They just were. That line stayed with me. We don't need sponsorship. We need the truth that we can. From then on, I trained like I believed it. The finish line tape broke against my chest with a soft snap, the kind of sound that doesn't belong to glory so much as relief. I bent over, hands on knees, heart slamming against my ribs like it was trying to get out. People were clapping, a few whistles. One person shouted, "Go Julia," but I didn't know who they were. I couldn't see anyone I recognized in the crowd, not that I was expecting to. This was the state championship. 2 years ago, I wouldn't have even dared to imagine myself here. Now I'd just won. And not just won, I'd shattered the previous course record by 7 full seconds. I waited for the microphone, for the journalist with a camera, for someone in a branded polo shirt to walk over and say, "That was incredible. Tell us your story." No one came. Instead, I picked up my duffel bag, cooled down with a quiet jog around the back of the field, and walked alone to the edge of the bleachers where no one was waiting. I texted Tessa, "Finished. New record. 16:41. She replied with one word, "Knew it." That was enough. A few weeks later, I won nationals. Same event, bigger field, more noise. Still no camera crews asking for sound bites. Still no coverage. My phone stayed silent, no calls, no messages from family. I checked social media out of reflex, just in case. My mother had posted a long message that morning. Not about me, it was about Sophie. "We are so proud of our daughter Sophie as she continues to grow and challenge herself in her journey toward the Olympic dream. Although this week didn't go as planned, she is and always will be our pride and joy." Family first, Olympic hopeful. No mention of her elimination, no mention of my victory. It stung less than I thought it would. Or maybe I had just grown used to it, the kind of numbness that settles in after years of being erased. Sophie, for her part, had given an interview with a local sports channel later that week. She spoke gracefully as always. She blamed no one. The interview ended with the host saying, "She's still a rising star in American tennis." Meanwhile, I was typing my name into the search bar of Google News. Nothing. No rising, no star. Just the echo of effort. I got a text that night from Riley, a girl I'd gone to school with. We weren't close, but she'd followed my journey out of curiosity, I guess. "Did you get any press? I heard you won nationals. No posts, no photos." I stared at the message for a long time before replying. I was never chosen. I just chose to keep going. It was the truest sentence I'd ever written. I hadn't been scouted, I hadn't been sponsored, I hadn't been interviewed, celebrated, hyped, or highlighted. But I had trained, I had shown up, I had run. That had to mean something. The next day, I walked into the community gym to stretch, and the front desk guy looked up surprised. "Hey," he said, "didn't you, win something I saw a post somewhere?" I shrugged. "Yeah, nationals." He blinked. "Holy crap, that's insane. Want a smoothie on the house?" I laughed. "Sure." That smoothie was the closest thing I got to a trophy celebration. And honestly, it felt more honest than a speech. Later that week, I stopped outside the same coffee shop where I used to work early shifts. In the window, there was a bulletin board where locals posted flyers, dog walkers, guitar lessons, tutoring services. In the middle, someone had pinned a blurry photo of me crossing the finish line. No headline, no caption, just a girl mid-stride, arms raised alone. I stood there for a moment staring. It was the only public evidence of what I'd done. But maybe that was enough. Because winning isn't always about who sees it. Sometimes it's just about who survives it. Sophie didn't tell anyone about the injury at first. It started with a sprain, something minor, from a rough return during a training match. But the pain didn't go away. Then came the swelling. The whispered concerns from her coach, the sleepless nights. By the time the MRI confirmed a partial tear, Sophie was already unraveling. The Olympic trials were off the table. Her sponsorship paused pending further performance updates. Her media appearances were quietly canceled. And Sophie, who had always carried herself like the world was watching, suddenly stopped showing up. I found out from someone else, a teammate of hers who ran into me at the grocery store. "Is Sophie okay?" she asked. "She hasn't been to practice in weeks." That's when I knew something was wrong. I didn't text her. I just showed up at her apartment with a bag of groceries, a heating pad, and 0 expectations. She opened the door in an old hoodie, her hair messy, face pale. Her wrist was wrapped clumsily in a brace. Her eyes looked older than I remembered. "Hey," I said softly. She didn't say anything, just stepped aside and let me in. For a while we sat in silence. I unpacked the groceries, fruit soup, a box of granola bars I knew she liked but never admitted to. Eventually, she said, "I feel like I'm disappearing." It wasn't dramatic, just quiet, honest. "You're not," I said. "You're still here." She looked down at her wrist. "Am I?" That night I didn't try to give her a speech or force positivity. I just showed her how to breathe again. Not metaphorically, literally. Inhale through your nose for 4. Hold for 4. Exhale through your mouth for 6. She followed my lead like a new student in a forgotten class. Over the next few weeks, I kept coming back. I brought resistance bands and foam rollers, showed her gentle stretches, corrected her posture when she started favoring the other side. We went for walks. Short ones at first, then longer. Eventually we found a rhythm, two sisters side by side, not competing, not comparing, just present. One morning after a jog and a clumsy attempt at sun salutations in her living room, Sophie sat back and said, "I used to think strength came from all the things I had: coaches, gear, schedules, sponsors." She paused. But it didn't. I had all of it. And still I never felt enough. She looked at me, eyes glassy but clear. "You didn't get any of it, not a cent. And somehow, you still went further than everyone." I didn't know what to say. So I smiled. Because in that moment she wasn't apologizing. She was seeing. And maybe that was enough. The stadium buzzed with electricity, nervous, expectant, global. It was the final day of the World Championships, and the women's 5,000-meter final was minutes from starting. Every lane on the track represented years of blood, sweat, and sacrifice. But only one lane, the outermost, was mine. No sponsors, no academy, no entourage in matching jackets. Just me. I stood behind the starting blocks, body still, heart loud. Across the lanes were women whose names filled magazine covers, whose social media teams prepped captions in advance. I had a chipped watch and a well-worn bib. Then came the voice of the announcer, smooth, practiced, but with an edge of curiosity. In lane 8, representing the United States, Julia Hart. No academy affiliation, no private sponsorship, no media campaign. Just raw speed and relentless discipline. There it was. My whole story summed up in one sentence. From the stands I heard polite claps. Then silence. Then the gun. The first lap blurred, fluid, efficient. By lap 2, my breath had settled into the rhythm I knew better than any lullaby. Lap 3 was heat and doubt. Lap 4 was clarity. Lap 5, hunger. And then came the final 400 meters. I surged. The stadium cracked open in sound, people standing, shouting names, ringing cowbells. I didn't hear mine. I didn't need to. I saw the finish line and I let go of everything I had left. I crossed first. The clock stopped blinking and froze 15:02. New personal best. Top 3 all-time finish in championship history. The medal ceremony came quickly, my name, the anthem, the podium. But this time I didn't focus on the song. I scanned the crowd. That's when I saw them, my parents, seated near the front, just left of center. Dad's face was unreadable. His jaw was tight, hands folded like he was bracing for something. Mom looked pale, her eyes fixed on the medal being placed over my head. Neither of them clapped. They didn't stand. They just sat. Cameras noticed. The big screen above the track split into 2 on one side, my face emotionless, composed. On the other, theirs, silent still like statues, caught in a moment they never imagined having to witness. The world saw it all. And then behind them, Sophie. She was on her feet, eyes glassy, clapping with a kind of force that didn't match her small frame. Her face was blotchy, her mouth trembling in a smile that had no room for envy, only pride. Our eyes met for just a second. She nodded once, and I felt it, not approval, not forgiveness, recognition. She knew what it had taken, and she knew she had seen the truth play out in front of everyone. When I stepped down from the podium, a journalist pushed a microphone toward me. "Julia, what does this moment mean to you?" I looked at the mic, then at the camera. I thought about all the ways I could answer, all the speeches I could give, the vindication, the pain, the years of being overlooked. But I just said, it means I didn't stop, and that was all. They found me backstage alone. The noise of the crowd was still echoing in the distance, the energy still vibrating through the stadium walls. But here in the small corner of the athlete zone, everything felt muted, like the world had taken a breath and was holding it. I was sitting on a folding chair, still in my track uniform, my legs sore, my medal tucked inside my gear bag where I didn't have to look at it anymore. The door opened. I didn't look up right away. I knew who it was by the uneven shuffle of my father's feet and the high-heeled hesitation of my mother's. Sophie followed close behind them, quiet as ever. My parents were holding something. A box. Small, velvet, deep navy. Too elegant for the moment. "We thought you might want this," Dad said after a pause. "Just something to remember today." He placed the box on the table in front of me like he was laying down an offering. I stared at it. Didn't move. "It's engraved," Mom added softly. "We had it made a while ago. We hoped it would mean something." I opened it slowly. Inside sat a Tag Heuer watch. Silver, clean lines, polished like it had never known struggle. I turned it over. On the back, engraved in precise lettering, "To Julia, our champion." I let the box stay open. Let the silence speak first. Then I said, "This watch can't measure the hours I trained when everyone else was asleep." My voice wasn't sharp, just clear. Like I'd waited years to say it without bitterness. It doesn't track the laps I ran in the dark. The mornings I ran until my lungs burned, the nights I massaged my own calves because I couldn't afford help. It doesn't store the moments I cried into a pillow after finishing last in practice and still getting up the next day. Dad shifted his weight. "We didn't know." "No," I interrupted gently. "You didn't ask." Mom looked wounded. "But I didn't stop. And I stopped telling you." Eventually, I realized it didn't matter whether you believed in me or not. I was going to do it anyway. I picked up the watch, felt its weight, and placed it carefully back in the box. Then I slid it across the table toward them. "This is beautiful. Really. But I don't need it." Dad's jaw tightened. Mom's fingers trembled slightly. "I don't blame you," I continued. "You chose the path that felt most secure, the one with headlines and uniforms and official schedules. I get it. But I was never asking for luxury. Just belief." "I'm proud of you," Mom said, finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I met her eyes. "You could have told me that when I won regionals, or when I made nationals, or when I didn't quit after losing the first 10 races of my life. It doesn't mean nothing now. But it doesn't mean everything either." Then Sophie stepped forward. She looked at the box, then at me. "If she won't take it," she said firmly, "then I don't want anything else from you either." Our parents looked stunned. Sophie, Dad said, "This isn't about yes, it is," she said, her voice louder than I'd ever heard. "It's about both of us. About how you gave me everything even when I didn't earn it. and gave her nothing even when she did. She turned to me. I watched you win without ever being invited. I stood on stages built for me that should have been yours. And now that you're here on the biggest stage of all, you still have to prove you belong. I didn't speak. I couldn't. I love you both, she said to our parents, but you need to know that this, she gestured to the watch. This isn't the apology you think it is. We stood in silence for a long time. Eventually, Dad reached for the box, but didn't take it. He just stared. You're right, he admitted. All of you. We missed it. You didn't just miss it, I said. You refused to see it. There's a difference. I didn't say it to wound, just to name the thing that had always been there. Finally, Sophie looked at me. Come on, she said, holding out her hand. Let's go. The people who actually supported you are waiting. I took her hand, and we left them there with their gift, their silence, and the weight of a truth that came far too late. 6 months after the medal ceremony, I opened the front door to my future. Not a stadium, not a stage, but a second-floor office space, above a bakery with peeling white paint and one working ceiling fan. There was no crowd, no cameras, just a small plaque on the glass run loud in silence, empowering unseen athletes. The name had come to me during a midnight run. It wasn't about noise, it was about presence, the kind that doesn't need approval to exist. I launched the foundation with my prize money, a small grant from a local sports nonprofit, and the savings I had once planned to use for graduate school. For once, I wasn't planning for a degree. I was building a space I needed years ago and never found. We started with the basics. Stipends for gear, monthly sessions with independent coaches, a network of mental health counselors trained to work with young women in sport. No glam, no filters, just support without strings or pressure. Our first intake had 6 girls, each with a story I recognized instantly. One had been running barefoot on gravel, hiding her passion from her father, who thought sports were a waste of time for girls. Another had walked 3 miles to the nearest park every day to train in jeans. They didn't need inspiration. They needed someone to look them in the eye and say, "You're not imagining it. It really is this unfair. But here's what we can do anyway." We didn't promise dreams. We offered tools. By month 4, we had over 50 athletes enrolled: track, soccer, weightlifting, even roller derby. Word was spreading through Whispers group chats, coaches who'd quietly been rooting for the kid with no backing. At night, I read their intake forms like prayer requests, not because I was trying to save them, but because I understood them. Then came the ESPN interview. A producer had reached out after a short op-ed I'd written for an athlete mental health forum. They asked if I'd sit for a profile segment during Women in Sports Month. I almost said no. But Tessa, now my unofficial board advisor, told me something I couldn't forget. When they ignore you, you build in silence. But when they finally ask, speak so clearly that no one forgets again. So I sat for the interview. No makeup crew, no designer backdrop, just me in a folding chair beside the office window wearing a hoodie with the foundation logo and holding a crumpled paper cup of tea. Toward the end, the reporter leaned in, almost like she was asking something just for herself. "Julia, for all the young girls watching this, what would you want them to hear from you directly?" I didn't hesitate. "You don't need to be chosen to begin," I said. "You just need to choose to believe in yourself." It wasn't rehearsed. It was real. That quote ended up going viral. Not millions of views, but enough. Enough to reach inboxes and bulletin boards and laminated posters inside school locker rooms. It showed up in high school assemblies and emails from coaches I'd never met. Some girls started mailing us thank you letters. Some sent drawings of themselves wearing race bibs or holding a soccer ball. They didn't want to be famous. They just wanted to be real. One Saturday, I drove out of town to visit my grandmother. May still lived in the same house by the lake, the one with the porch swing and the wind chimes that sounded like gentle questions. She greeted me with her usual hug that smelled of peppermint and sunlight. Inside, the living room hadn't changed, except for one wall. There, among faded family photos and old calendars, she'd cleared a spot. "I thought you might want to hang it here," she said. I pulled the medal from my backpack, still in its drawstring pouch, still as bright as the day I received it, but lighter now, like it no longer needed to carry what it once did. She handed me a small hammer and a brass hook. No ceremony, no announcement, just one generation telling another, "You matter." I hung the medal beside a photo of 9-year-old me holding a plastic ribbon beaming like it was gold. "Why here?" I asked. May looked up soft but steady. "Because this is where someone first saw you. That photo. You were proud. But more than that, you believed. Before coaches, before trophies, before the noise." We sat in silence watching the medal sway gently on the hook. She reached for my hand. "You see, medals are just metal," she said. "But freedom is forever." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Outside, the lake shimmered. Inside, history made room for a girl who was never supposed to be in the frame, and now she would never be left out again. Have you ever had to fight for something others were simply given? Have you ever felt like no one chose you, and yet somehow you still found the strength to choose yourself? If Julia's story speaks to something inside you, let it be a reminder. You are not alone. You are not invisible. And your journey is worth being heard. We'd love to hear your voice. Share your story in the comments below, or tell us about the moment you realized you didn't need anyone's permission to shine. And if this story moved you, subscribe to the channel for more powerful narratives of resilience, quiet strength, and the unexpected paths we take to reclaim our worth. Because sometimes, the loudest victories are the ones no one expected you to win.